Welcome to the Becoming Superhuman podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to bring you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
This episode is brought to you by Organifi. You guys, one of the only things that every nutritional expert that we've had on the show seems to actually agree on is that we all need to eat more vegetables, eat more greens, eat organic, cut out all the processed junk. Well, who has the time, right? Who has the time to go out, do the shopping, make the salads, make the juices, make the smoothies? And that's what I love so much about Organifi. Their product is an all organic green juice. It has all of the nutrients that you need. It tastes absolutely amazing, and it's made by wonderful people who I consider to be personal friends. And as listeners of this show, you guys can actually save 20% on your first order. And all you have to do is go to Organifi.com. That's ORGANIFI.com and use the coupon code SUPERHUMAN at checkout. Before we get started, I just want to let you guys know that this week's episode is brought to you by my new online course, Become a Superhuman. And yes, it sounds exactly like the title of the podcast, but this is actually an online course where we go into the various aspects of improving your health, specifically your endocrine health. More specifically, getting your testosterone up to the optimal levels. Now, whether you're a male or a female, as we've learned in numerous episodes of the show, testosterone is the ultimate feel-good motivation, improved health, improved fitness, improved body composition, super drug. Okay, so everything from your mood to your recovery time and everything in between is affected by your body's endocrine health. And what my team and I have done is we've actually taken years of my own self-experimentation, years of research, every possible literature and study we could find, and we've condensed it into a simple 3 to 4 hour program that you can follow along and make simple, safe, and easy adjustments to your lifestyle to improve your endocrine health. Now, as listeners of this podcast, you can get a very special discount by visiting jle.vi/T. That's jle.vi, just like my name, /T for testosterone. Greetings, super friends, and welcome to this week's episode. You guys, before we get started, I want to read an awesome review from Richard from Switzerland, which is a long review, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. But he does say, started listening to podcasts because of this one. Wow. I don't even remember how I stumbled upon this podcast, but I'm so happy I did. There are 3 podcasts that I regularly follow: the Tim Ferriss Show, Lewis Howes School of Greatness, and Jonathan Levy's The Becoming Superhuman podcast. And I only ended up discovering the other 2 after having started with this one. He goes on to say that he has discovered meditation, cardiovascular exercise, developing the adolescent brain, and a lot of other really incredible personal stuff that he shared in the review that really brightened my day. Richard, I'm so thankful that we've had an impact on your life. And for anyone else out there who is listening, please leave a review. You can see they make me so happy. On to today's episode, you guys. Today we are joined by Marilyn Glenville. If you haven't heard of Marilyn, well, you probably don't live in the UK, because she is the UK's leading nutritionist, and she specializes in women's health. But she's an inspiring public speaker. She's very easy to listen to and very practical in her approach. She's also the former president of the Food and Health Forum at the Royal Society of Medicine, and she's written over 20 books. So we talk about nutrition. We talk about all the various aspects, the ins and outs. We discover some interesting stuff. We discover some interesting ways that ancestral health or a Mediterranean diet can improve maladies that you might not know it can improve. And in general, we give some great homework for you to play around with and see how you can optimize and improve your diet. I know you guys are going to enjoy this episode, so I don't have to say I hope. Only one caveat, one warning, one apology, guys, which is we did have a little bit of an internet connectivity issue. Our editor has done some great work to make this seamless as possible, but if you miss a word or two here and there, I do apologize, and I hope you guys are able to make out all the great stuff that Marilyn talks about. And now, without any further ado, let me present to you Marilyn Glenville. Marilyn, welcome to the show. We are so happy to have you today. How are you doing?
Very well. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Lovely to be here.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So, Marilyn, I introduced you a little bit in the intro of the show, but for those who maybe haven't heard about your work, tell us a little bit about what you do. I know you have the prestigious title of being the UK's most acclaimed nutritionist, but tell us a little bit about your work and how it all started.
Well, I specialize in women's health. I've been in nutritional aspects of women's health, although I do look after men as well. And I've been working in the field now for over 35 years, so quite a time really. And it's been a very exciting journey with all the new research that comes out on nutrition and health quite constantly.
Absolutely. So tell us, Marilyn, how did you get into the field originally? What drove you to nutrition of all things?
Well, it was interesting. I had an issue. I used to suffer very badly through my childhood with migraines, and they were so debilitating. I used to go into have a dark room. I was very nauseous, very sick, would be affecting the quality of my life. And it was that drove me, after having brain scans, trying all the solutions for it, to actually look for a different approach. And it was that hardship really and the suffering, the terrible pain, that actually pushed me to look for a different solution.
And what was that? I mean, it was really just diet that was behind all the migraines?
Yes, it was actually. The migraines were being triggered by a number of foods. It was actually cheese, chocolate. They were the main ones. And it would occur to me at that point, and nobody, after all the specialists I'd seen and all the consultants, would have suggested actually there could have been a food trigger. So it was just very interesting to find out. I know it seemed a simple solution, and it was, but it was such a dramatic difference to have that knowledge that then I knew I could control the pain just by avoiding a couple of simple foods.
Yeah, it's an incredible lesson to take away. You said something actually really interesting, though, which is, no nutritionist or doctor that you would have talked to at the time would have pointed to those foods or diet, which made me immediately think, I mean, you've been in this industry for a lot longer, and now I think it's become trendy and fashionable to avoid dairy, and we all know the pains of grains. But back then, this was probably pretty controversial. There were probably a lot of nutritionists who told you dairy is important and grain is important. So how did you go about learning this, what is now becoming so widely accepted, but back then?
Well, it was actually, I went to see a nutritionist. I wasn't into the natural medicine field at all, but I went to see an acupuncturist. It was the first experience for me. It was a Chinese doctor, and he did the acupuncture session. And then he suggested that I actually looked at my food and maybe took out additives, preservatives, that sort of thing. And each week I went back, I was removing more and more foods. And it wasn't until I was looking at the cheese and chocolate aspect did I realize then that they were triggering it. But it got to the point where I was eating less and less foods. I felt my diet was restricted, and realized then there must be more ways of using the foods that I was able to eat effectively. And that's when that drove me into the nutrition side of it. Mm-hmm. It was just a wonderful experience to be free from that pain.
I can imagine. And so you've gone on and written quite a number of books, including Natural Alternatives to Sugar. Tell me a little bit about that, because I know, well, first, let me ask this. What's wrong with the unnatural alternatives to sugar? I mean, I've never really done the research on the sucralose and all that.
Yes, it's very interesting. And obviously, when we say artificial sweetener, it definitely implies it's artificial. So it is a chemical. It's not even natural in that sense. And obviously, there have been controversy around whether they're good or bad for our health. But the interest that's come out, I would say, in the last 2 years, is that they increase our risk of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease. They actually make people gain weight and increase their appetite, which is, people are normally taking these artificial sweeteners and using them because they want to control their weight. So we have this irony of the more they use them, they're going to gain. And how the mechanism works is that normally when we have something sweet, it comes with a bulk of calories. When we go for something with these artificial sweeteners, the calories aren't there. So the scientists are seeing that what it does is it sends somebody off to get those calories from somewhere else. So they get an increase in appetite and an increase in weight gain, which is actually what they're trying to use the artificial sweeteners to avoid.
Right. Just because of the regulation of insulin and ghrelin and all of these hormones that control hunger, even if it's not actually a calorically dense sweet food that they're eating.
Yes, and what is also being shown is that it changes the microbiome, and within 7 days of going on to these artificial sweeteners. And now we know that these beneficial bacteria play such an important part in calorie regulation, type 2 diabetes, weight gain. So it may be actually what's going on with the microbiome from the effect of these artificial sweeteners that's actually changing somebody's appetite, changing the fat storage in tissue. So it's quite an interesting field opening up.
Absolutely. I think the microbiome is quite arguably one of the most interesting ones, just in that we're seeing things that are maybe not fun to talk about, but things like, fecal transplants, which have so much potential for people who are chronically suffering from all kinds of maladies.
Exactly. And also the weight gain, which would be an interesting one. And also things like depression, because we have neurotransmitters within the gut. We talk about our gut being our second brain. So I think there's going to be a lot of ways we can help people emotionally as well as physically by working on or helping them diversify the microbiome. And for me, it is the thing about there are things into the diet like artificial sweeteners that have such an impact, something that we can actually make a difference with in quite a short space of time.
Mm-hmm. Now, I wanted to ask you, I was looking at the list of books that you've written, and kind of given my background on learning and everything like that, one particularly stood out to me, which is Natural Solutions for Dementia and Alzheimer's, and specifically The Ultimate Guide to Preventing Short-Term Memory Loss. I think that's something that really interests everyone in our audience. Many of our listeners come from my memory courses and therefore are interested in improving their memory. And I imagine as they get into older age would like to keep it that way. So talk to me a little bit about how we can also adjust our diets for improving or retaining our memory.
Yes, and doing the research for that dementia book was quite an eye-opener. And I've written a 7-step plan to work on improving memory, cognitive function. And when we look at the nutrition research in the medical literature, it's outstanding of how we can work on ourselves, change our diet that could be making such a significant difference. It's just that the person in the street to hear about that information because there isn't a huge financial benefit driving it. It's not that somebody's going to come up with a wonder drug, this magic bullet that's going to be making the difference. So to disseminate that information, it's only people like yourself that can get that information out there, or we write books for people to see that there is a lot they can do, but it's going to come as normally from the mainstream.
I think you're definitely right. And I imagine it sounds a lot like a lot of the other advice in a lot of the other books. I mean, do you see a lot of consistency between the nutritionary guidelines for avoiding, say, osteoporosis or for reducing sugar or for Alzheimer's, or is it's pretty much all very different?
There are certain aspects that are very similar when we think about the Mediterranean diet and the benefits of that. There are some other things, though, that are much focused, and people can use those particular aspects to a greater benefit. I think a couple of them stand out would be, in particular, the omega-3 fatty acids, which of course come from the oily fish and the flax seeds and things that are in the Mediterranean diet. But they're actually showing now that particularly the DHA in the omega-3 has such a significant effect on preventing the plaque buildup and improving blood flow to the brain. So it's going to be good for all of us any age, whether we want to keep our memory sharp now or improve our cognitive function. And for those who know they have a strong family history of either Alzheimer's or vascular dementia, where it could be plaque buildup or blood flow to the brain. The other one where there's remarkable research are on the B vitamins, and some particular evidence showing that certain amounts of the B vitamins, including the folate, the B6, the B12, actually prevented 90% of brain shrinkage. And when we see results like that and putting in a few key nutrients, my feeling is always, what have you got to lose? There's no downside to putting these nutrients in there, to changing our, there's only the upside of the benefit. So this research is just outstanding, and there's more of it, and yet I don't think enough people get to hear about it.
I would agree with you, and I think that's one of our central missions here. I don't want to go through every single one of the books and ask you to divulge all the secrets, but I do want to ask specifically about osteoporosis. As someone in my life was recently diagnosed with osteoporosis, and I'd love to know just a little bit, maybe to pique interest of those in the audience who are concerned about osteoporosis or maybe have a loved one that they want to help reverse it.
Yes, it does obviously affect women more than men. And now the research is showing that 1 in 2 women over the age of 50 will get osteoporosis. It does affect men as well, about 1 in 9. And obviously, women especially need to think about history and their mother, and could they be more at risk? And I would say, if they are concerned, is to go and have a bone density scan. It is a silent disease. We don't feel necessarily any symptoms, no pain. And oftentimes what is happening now is the fracture is actually the diagnosis. So the bone has become more brittle over time. There are no symptoms, and the woman just has a very low trauma knock or goes over on a heel walking along, or even women have sneezed just sitting down in the chair and fractured their ribs. So it could be now that the fracture starts off the diagnosis, and that's when it's gone way down the line. So you're right, it is about thinking about prevention, and we all think about the exercise, and we have to make a demand on the skeleton. 2 key things that come from the research is that vitamin D is critical. That the researchers are saying now that vitamin D a good level in the blood is more important than calcium intake, because without that vitamin D being at a good level, we won't be absorbing the calcium. And my suggestion for every woman out there is to get their vitamin D checked. If they can't do it medically, there is a simple finger prick test on naturalhealthpractice.com, and that can be sent anywhere in the world and sent back again. But it's one of those where in my clinic, we're seeing critical deficiencies. And in the UK, we've got rickets back now in children that we thought we'd got rid of 40 years ago. So out of all the tests we can do nutritionally, I think vitamin D has to be the major one. And a lot of women wear moisturizers. And in those moisturizers, there will be inbuilt sun protection factors. So there could be some days where actually there's no exposure to the sun at all, even though the women aren't consciously thinking they put on a sunscreen. And the other area of research, which I think is very interesting, is this whole acid-alkali balance. And that as the diet becomes too acidic, calcium, which is a buffer and it's kept in the skeleton, is actually released in order to buffer the acidic diet. So that's where one of the focuses for osteoporosis may be slightly different from another, in that it does need to become much more alkaline for the woman. And again, we're thinking of sugar, caffeine, but not going too high, especially on the animal protein, and it needs to be balanced up with the fruit and veg. So really research in there. And if women can think about what they're doing at an early age, from the age of 35 onwards, because that's when we reach our peak bone mass, is to think about what we can do to protect ourselves.
I love that. I think that's really, really important, and also some surprising stuff because, you know, my mother's doctor is still telling her calcium, calcium, calcium. And, you know, maybe a side mention of, oh, and also make sure you get some vitamin D. And we all are so vitamin D deficient. I think we've done a really good job educating an entire generation of people, you know, that sun exposure in excess causes cancer. And so it's great that people use sunscreen, but, you know, you don't need sunscreen every single day unless you're going to be sitting in the sun, unless you have some kind of condition. And so I think given how much we spend in time indoors, we really all are vitamin D deficient.
I would agree. And the vitamin D research is not only then really vital when we look at osteoporosis, but interestingly now, the research spreads out right across the board. Type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, breast cancer for women, and cancer in general, because vitamin D is an immune modulator. They've looked at it in terms of autoimmune conditions because it has the ability to bring the immune system down if it's overactive and bring it up if it's underactive. For me, vitamin D and getting it checked for everybody for their health, man or a woman, when we think of all these conditions now where they're looking at vitamin D levels, I think it's so important. And when people say to me, what would be, say, 2 of the most important nutritional tests they should do, I'd have to say vitamin D would be the top one. And the second one would be the omega-6 to 3 ratio, because that, if it's out of kilter, produces a pro-inflammatory reaction. And the research is now suggesting that inflammation is key and the underlying cause to all of our degenerative illnesses. So there are those 2 top tests that I think, apart from anything else, that they would be vital for most people to do.
Those are really fantastic pieces of homework. I really appreciate that. I actually wanted to ask you if there was any other homework that you would love to assign. I mean, besides obviously choosing one of your many books that applies to people, what is some homework or maybe a self-experiment that people could play with this week and try out at home?
I would suggest, I think, what is eye-opening in the clinic when I ask people to keep a food diary. I send them a questionnaire and I ask them about their health and what their goals are and what they'd like to achieve from the consultation. And I also ask them to complete a food diary. And I would suggest that people do write down what they're eating, say over days, and try and mix weekend in with the week so that the days are different, and count up the cups of coffee, the colas, the food, and just write it down, how many slices of bread, how much added sugar is going into that food. And most of the time we think, oh, we're only having a little bit. And what I found out writing the Natural Alternatives to Sugar book was that from some of the research from America, that even if people don't add sugar to their tea and coffee, some people are getting up to 46 teaspoons of added sugar a day because it's in all of these other foods as hidden sugar. So it would be for people to read the labels over the 5 days, see what's going in or in the food that they're actually consuming, and keep a food, be really honest about what they're eating. And it may be a bit of a wake-up call at the end of those 5 days, because sometimes it's only when we start to write something down do we actually see it in black and white, and then we can see actually, well, it isn't really good and I could make, drastic changes here.
Right. Knowing is half the battle. I remember at one point there was this great show by one of your countrymen, actually, Jamie Oliver, where he was going around America trying to bring people's attention to health food in some of the most resistant communities, people that were really proud of their fried foods and their, that it was a badge of honor that they were eating unhealthy. And what he did is he observed the family for a week and then duplicated, for the theatrics of it, everything that family had eaten in 1 week, and he put it out on the kitchen table, and it was just alarming to see how much sugar was there, how many grains, how much fat. I mean, the table was just dripping with saturated fats. And that's when these people were like, oh, wow, I'll just have one slice of pizza throughout the week turns into this. And, the mother broke out into tears, of course.
Yes. And I think sometimes it does need to be made as bluntly that to shock somebody into making a change, because it is a question of always, how do we help people responsibility for their health, whether we're thinking of them emotionally or like the area you work in, how do people motivate themselves, those changes, and to, have different experiences in their life. And sometimes it needs to be a shock or a wake-up call for them to start to make those changes. Otherwise, people carry on doing the same thing that they've always been doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I wanted to ask you, I thought it was so interesting how you were one of the earlier people to realize this whole, hey, it's sugar, it's not fats thing, and start writing about it. Are there any things that you believe today that other people today think is crazy?
Yes, I'm still fighting against the is fattening situation in terms of all fat is bad is still the key message that is still out there. And still the fight against the refined carbohydrates and the sugar is actually what is making us fat and causing the obesity and the type 2 diabetes situation. So in the UK, we still have this plate where the carbohydrates and that are still making up a huge portion of the recommendations, even for people with type 2 diabetes. And because I have this passion for women's health, I do see women who are still on the no fat and the low fat diets, and the essential fats like the omega-3s, they will not eat a nut or a seed. They're not touching the oily fish because they still have this message that fat is fattening. And that is a very difficult one to get over. And it really is trying with the education, them to have the understanding that actually these are called essential fatty acids for a reason, and that you cannot produce them in your body. And the only way they come in is from the outside, either through the diet or in supplement form. And they are essential fats. The body absolutely needs them, particularly the omega-3 for their anti-inflammatory benefits. But they have to come in from the outside in. Your body cannot make them. And if they are on these restricted fat diets, there are symptoms of dryness, dry hair, dry skin, painful joints, all of the things where the body doesn't have the lubrication. And it is all about keeping our cells as flexible and fluid as we can, whether that's in our brain, all the messages and the neurotransmitters, or insulin receptors, because we don't want to become insulin resistant, end up with type 2 diabetes. And we want our arteries to stay flexible as we get older. So is a bit of a battle, an uphill battle about this whole issue that all fat is fattening and all fat is bad.
Yeah, it really is, I think, one of the greatest lies ever sold, and has hurt and harmed more people around the world than many, many, many other lies that I can think of. And it's just this one simple piece of research in the 1970s and one commission that decided that this is the decision. And yet, you see these people who are on these low-fat diets and they don't ever seem to get better. And if they do, it's for short periods of time where they regain the weight and they're miserable.
Yes. And the food themselves that they may be choosing, which is the low-fat version, could be high in sugar. There could be other things added in there because it's losing the flavor. And really interesting, if somebody goes for a low-fat yogurt, the tendency is to eat more afterwards, where if they go for a yogurt that is full fat, organic, it's the fat that creates the satisfying effect. It has a satiety effect. So they actually feel more satisfied with the fat in there and need to eat less afterwards. So going through all the low fat food is actually driving to get the flavors from somewhere else, or they're adding other things, salt and sugar, into the food to make it palatable.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And in general, I mean, you had mentioned for migraines, dairy's a no-no. In general, for kind of your average person, are you in favor of dairy or cautious?
I am cautious. I'm cautious particularly on the osteoporosis side, which is an interesting, because when they look at the acidity effect on the kidneys, it's actually the cheese, hard cheese, that has the biggest acidity effect, even higher than red meat in some of the studies. Milk and yogurt, pretty much neutral. We're not talking about pH, but how it's working on the acidity in the kidneys. But the cheese, and the harder the cheese, the more the acidity affects. So I do have reservations around dairy. For me, my feeling is that if people are going to go for dairy foods, it needs to be organic, and to go more for the yogurt. So at least the beneficial bacteria in there, much easier food to digest, and go for a plain yogurt, because in the fruit yogurts, we could be perceived as a healthy food. Even if the fruit was removed, there could be 8 teaspoons of added sugar in an ordinary size yogurt pot. So we have to be a bit careful where our food appears to be healthy and yet it's been altered in some way, particularly with the fruit added. There will also be this 8 teaspoons of added sugar.
Wow.
Thing about the homework, read the labels. The labels need to be read, because it can be in there and yet the food would be a healthy food.
Wow. Incredible. And a really important message. And I appreciate you sharing that, because I think so much of what people believe to be health food. And, the latest one is not the eating the low fat instead of this. The latest one is, well, it's gluten free. And it's like, yeah, it's gluten free because it's refined potato starch, which has even higher glycemic load than the gluten one.
Yes, and also a variety of other things in there, the added sugar, colorings, preservatives. It is frightening what is in the gluten-free foods that people are just saying, well, it's gluten-free, it's fine, and yet it's not a healthy food. It just is amazing what has been added to these foods. So people read the labels and do not go by the marketing. This is particularly important on breakfast cereals, where it may say fortified with certain vitamins or minerals. That food, particularly with a breakfast cereal, can be very high in the added sugars, and they may often break them down into 4 or 5 different sugars like dextrose, corn syrup, sucrose. Sugar is not the first ingredient on the list. So there will be different forms of sugar, which moves the further down the ingredient list, but if you added them up, it is a high amount of sugar in those breakfast cereals, and even more in the breakfast cereals with all the cartoon characters and the movie characters on there. So we do have to be diligent and not just go by the marketing on the front of a packet. We need to turn it round and look at that added sugar in that product, and any of the artificial sweeteners, preservatives, colorings. Look at what's in that food before you choose it.
Those are very, very wise words to wrap on here. So, Marilyn, I want to give you an opportunity to let people know where to reach out to you and where to learn more. I know you have so many books on Amazon. We'll link to your author page, but where else can people get in touch?
Yes, I have an educational website called MarilynGlenville.com, and it does cover a lot of health issues, and people are welcome to download that information. If they're interested in any of the tests I use in the clinic and even the supplements as well, go to naturalhealthpractice.com. A lot of the tests, like the finger prick ones for vitamin D and omega-3 deficiency, can be done by post from abroad. So things can be done far away, especially if you feel that medically there's not an issue or the tests are negative. We need to look at something else, or treat the underlying cause. And that is really important. If you address the cause, you've got a long-term solution. Otherwise, it's all about treating the symptoms, which doesn't give you the benefit in the long term.
Fantastic note to end on. Marilyn, I want to thank you very, very much again. It's been a real pleasure with you. I'm glad that we've met, and I hope you continue writing books and helping people understand how they can achieve better health through nutrition.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's been wonderful to speak to you too.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right, super friends, that is all we have for you today, but I hope you guys really enjoyed the show, and I hope you learned a ton of actionable information, tips, advice that will help you go out there and overcome the impossible. If you've enjoyed the show, please take a moment to leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher, or drop us a quick little note on the Twitter machine at GoSuperhuman. Also, if you have any ideas for anyone out there who you would love to see on the show, we always love to hear your recommendations. You can submit on our website, or you can just drop us an email and let us know. That's all for today, guys. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit www.becomingasuperhuman.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.